Okay, there you go.
All right. Thank you for joining us. If you are joining us live or if you are joining us to watch the recording, my name is Meg Grotti, and I'm the Assistant Head of Instructional Services at the University of Delaware Library. And I'm joined today by Matt Plourde, who is with IT Academic Technology Services here at University of Delaware. And Matt has been highly engaged with the topic of open educational resources for many years. So I'm happy to be able to present with you today, Matt.
Yep,
So,
hi.
So our goal today is really to provide you with an overview of open textbook resources, what they are, what are open textbooks, why you might consider them, and how you might go about finding them, evaluating them, adopting them, adapting them, and using them. So we'll also provide a few examples of open textbook initiatives that are out there, some local practice to sort of anchor all of this. All right, so go ahead and forward that slide, Matt. Let's talk a little bit about a basic assumption about education. And I think one thing that maybe we don't say explicitly too often, maybe because it is so basic, is that at the heart of education really is the notion of sharing. So we may not state this totally explicitly, but when you look into a classroom context, what you see is a definite kind of back and forth that happens in different ways. So for example, you may see a health science professor drawing from his own research or his own experiences, diagnosing patients to construct a problem-based learning activity for his students and sharing his experience that way. A student might be completing a reflection on how his experiences throughout the course have shown his learning or his movement toward course outcomes and sharing his experiences for an assessment in that way. Or a TA may be sharing her experiences from her childhood in order to illustrate a theoretical concept in a lecture. So in any one of these regular kind of teaching experiences that we have in the classroom, sharing is really fundamental to the educational process. And you also see this sort of in a macro level out there in the wider educational field with many different openness kinds of initiatives, or not initiatives, but trends that are happening out there in the world. For example, open access publishing, which allows for free and immediate online availability of research for digital use. Or open data initiatives that make data freely available to others in open repositories. Open source software, which I think is a really kind of interesting way to think about this idea of you put your actual process out there, you put the material out there in the form of source code if it's an open source software, and then people are able to make adaptations to that source. They're able to that source code to change it, to improve upon it, and those improvements build upon improvements over time. And I think you can see this as well in sort of the open textbook world. As adaptations build upon adaptations, you get a much more powerful product. So let's talk a little bit about open textbooks, where they fit in, and some of the current state of affairs with textbooks. So Matt, I'll give it to you. Take it away.
Yep. So, so in terms of the textbooks, just a little bit of history. So, like for instance, I found this quote from Elson, 1964, and back in the day, the textbook was the only source of authority the schools in rural areas. Basically, the people who were teaching the kids back in the day were just higher level students. So they wanted to use the textbooks for memorization and so that basically the message wouldn't be distorted. So they didn't trust the teachers, and those textbooks were designed with that in mind. Then later, basically, when we turned into the 20th century, then there was a shift towards more of an industrial type of way of using textbooks. So now you basically had a couple of textbook publishers that wanted to have, they wanted to develop a market that was large enough to sustain their efforts. So for instance, in WAT 2007, they're talking
Try sharing your screen one more time. I'm awful sorry. We see.
My screen is shared.
Do our screen.
Okay, I'm sorry. So anyway, so the idea was that they wanted to get as many people adopting the same textbook. They wanted to make it as as scaled up as possible, which is kind of the opposite of what we do in the classroom. In the classroom, we like to take content and adapt it to our students. We want to make something that's very tailored to our students. But the textbook industry has always been kind of aiming at the opposite of that. Then some of the barriers to the textbook as a sharing medium, because we talked about sharing at the beginning, is that so the paper format still the same as Gutenberg's press, 14th, 15th century. So it's hard to just take a textbook and shred it to pieces and have a chapter here and there. Copyright restrictions, because actually the textbook was created as a paper format in many cases. It's not necessarily a practice that is authorized. Like, you can't really scan or take a picture of a textbook and make it available digitally to your students because it's a different format, and the copyright restricts that practice. And then the practice of publishers, which is to create new editions every other year so that they basically can still make money over, like every 2 or 3 years they get out a new edition that has minimal changes, and then it creates confusion and restricts the secondary market when people want to sell their used textbooks. And then, we thought that e-textbooks would come in and just, say, you know what, we found a solution to the textbook problem, but really they have been, I call them defective by design, because they are built on proprietary technologies that limit the lifespan and the shareability. So a lot of textbook publishers actually have their own app that restrict, like, copy and paste. You can't really do a copy paste from the application to like a document if you wanted to use source materials from these into like a Word document that you were working on or whatever. They also have a lot of little gimmicks, like, selling access code so that so that students have access to a homework as a service platform.
You're kind of cutting in and out here on us. I'm not sure if it's a connection issue.
Okay. Well, it seems like the audio is fine on the recording because I'm watching on the other side. So anyway, so access codes. The textbooks are still very high in terms of the prices. You would think that a digital native format would be cheaper, but they still sell those textbooks for a pretty penny. And it's also hard to create e-textbooks that are customized. So you would think that because stuff is digital, that you would be able to take a chapter here, an image there, and whatever, and create a true custom textbook. But it's still very difficult to do that, especially across publishers. And then when you create an e-textbook like that, that e-textbook has no resale value. You can't resell it. You're only going to buy it or rent it or whatever. So Meg, take it away.
Okay, so I like this example that I spotted in a couple textbooks. It's kind of surprising where you find these kinds of inferences. Vesalius, he was a Flemish physician who became a really very important figure in education. He published The Fabric of the Human Body, which is a really groundbreaking textbook for a variety of reasons. It set new standards for the way that anatomy was studied through direct observation. And he was working on some of the same kinds of problems that we see today when we talk about textbooks. He recognized that his students could not afford to buy this textbook that was quickly becoming this anatomical education in his day. So he published an epitome, which was dense, sort of his cash-strapped medical students would be able to afford it. And interestingly, in that epitome, it actually included 2 anatomical drawings that students were encouraged and used to match to different structures in the body to facilitate an active learning kind of approach, which I just love this example because I think it shows how textbooks and what we do with them are an important means of documenting some of our intellectual about that later in relation to open textbooks and open educational resources more broadly. And it also shows how long-standing some of these problems of the costs of in specific. I think that the challenges that our students face today would make Vesalius's students look incredibly fortunate indeed. So Matt, you want to talk a little about some of the, try to talk a little bit more slowly. It seems that we're cutting out and missing some of your content.
Okay, I'll try to do that. So this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as published in by the Government Accountability Office. Statistics from 2002 to 2012 in terms of so tuition and fees for college and college textbook prices have basically risen at 3 times the consumer index or inflation. So, and that has been a trend that's been going on forever, which means that if you're listening to this broadcast or you're attending this session and you've completed your studies like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the relative cost to getting a college degree now is a lot higher than it used to be. So that's something that even, for like community colleges where there's a lot of issues with students not completing their degrees because they can't afford it, a lot of these community colleges have actually taken steps to reduce their costs or the cost of learning materials, which is not something that we've seen as much with state research institution, but it's coming. This is something that needs to be addressed. Another thing about the textbook market is that it is a captive market. And what I mean by that is that basically the publishers usually talk to professors and they try to sell their textbook to the professor. Then the professor says, well, this is a textbook I want to use. And they just assign that textbook to the bookstore. And then after that, students have to make a choice. What are they going to do? Are they going to buy buy a new book from the bookstore as a paper copy? Are they going to use the used market? Are they going to download the e-textbook? Or are they going to just not buy the textbook altogether or buy one copy for like 3 or 4 students? And in many cases, we see students just not buying the textbooks in advance because they're like, I'm not even sure if I'm going to need it. And basically, the students are really the victims in this kind of scam because they're the ones who are forced to get the learning materials at any cost, basically, or at a cost that they need to figure out themselves. So go ahead, Meg. Okay.
So open textbooks then can provide an important way to overcome some of these barriers of cost and access while supporting strong instructional practice. So what are they? There you go, Matt, thank you. They are open textbooks are collections of academic texts which are released under a license, an open license that allows the work to be copied, shared, and revised. So they're typically created by educators, by experts in the field, communities of users that have built up over time around them. So they typically can be downloaded at no cost or printed at low cost, which helps with some of those access barriers. And they tend to electronic distribution methods, again, to reduce some of those costs associated with owning an actual copy of a textbook. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Different studies that you may be familiar with that sort of discuss and that's when they are in a learning mode. So many students still do report that they prefer a print copy of something as opposed to an e-copy of something when they are doing deep reading and learning. But mean that it has to be an e-only resource. And many institutions work closely with the bookstore, and we'll provide an example later, in order to provide a low-cost printed option. Also, you can have a print component to that. So I find that the 5R framework, which was developed by David Wiley, is useful with what an open educational resource, including an open textbook, do. So for you to consider something an open educational resource, you should be able to do these 5 things with it. The license should allow you to do that. So on the first hand, you can reuse it. You use it verbatim, basically, or you can, the second one, revise it. You can adapt it, adjust it, modify it, and alter the content by adding updated examples, perhaps additional that your students can be working with. You can remix it. You can take chapters out. You add in chapters to create something new. So, for example, a really great that does a better job of teaching the concept you are working on, you could put that in and sort of add it into the textbook. And redistribute copies of the original content, so whether that's the actual original that you had started with, or whether it's a version that reflects some of those revisions and remixing that you have done. And then retain, this item was more recently added to this framework, retain copies of that content locally. So those are the 5 R's, and I think it's helpful to kind of look at a few examples. And I'll just do a few of these here, just in the interest of time. Because I think if you think of using the 5 R's as a lens, you can kind of determine what would really fit this bill of an open educational resource. So if you think about a New York Times article, something that appeared in the New York Times, and it's free online, how is that an open educational resource or isn't it? Obviously, the New York Times put that out there. They've made it available. Something you can add a subscription, but this is something that is still going to be under full copyright. So to be able to redistribute that fully. You're not going to be able to remix it, revise it in these kinds of ways that we're talking about. It is something that is very New York Times. Another kind of example that's licensed by the UD Library. So this is an item that the library access to through its license, and in this case, obviously, this might be a lower cost alternative, assign an ebook to your class as opposed to a textbook, or assign a chapter, but it is an item that is fully under copyright. You wouldn't be able to do that by downloading it, bringing it into your learning management system. Instead, what you're going to want to do is link to it through a permalink and point to the resource. And you're not going to be able to just remix it in the kind of flexible way that we're talking about here. So I would say an ebook of a affordable, potentially affordable course content is not going to be something that fits the fully open educational resource. And also another important sort of point about licensed library materials is your students are already paying for them while they're students, but they can't access to it. Matt, you want to talk about MOOCs in this kind of framework?
Yes. So a lot of people, they always use the, MOOCs. MOOCs is the buzzword that we heard, especially like I would say 3 or 4 years ago. People were talking about those massive open online courses. And because the word open is in the name doesn't mean that the courses themselves are open. They're open enrollment, but they're still copyrighted. And in many cases, like for instance, if you sign up for a MOOC on Coursera, like the one that's linked on those slides, you have access to the materials just for the time of the course. And extracting content from there is actually pretty complicated, and in certain cases it does infringe copyright if you wanted to reuse those materials for your own courses, for instance, because what Coursera would want to do is have you license the material so you can use it for your own institution. So don't be fooled by the idea that something is called open, because basically this is the MOOC poster, which I designed in 2013 to explain that confusion that went with the word MOOC. And a lot of the MOOCs are actually open registration, but they're not open educational resources. They're just open as a way to market, basically a brand from an Ivy League institution or something. So make sure that you always check on any website that you use or any resource to see if there is a license that actually allows you to enable the 5 Rs. In terms of copyright, that's one of the other things about open educational resources, and we'll talk about open licensing in a minute. But the idea is that there are a lot of rules in the U.S. especially related to copyright that actually allow you to use a lot of materials for your own courses. And we don't want to go into too much details about this, but we want to introduce the idea of Creative Commons, which is a licensing scheme for copyrighted work. Go ahead, Meg.
Okay, so this is sort of where Creative Commons comes in, and open licensing is kind of an essential thing to at least begin to wrap your mind or thinking about a textbook. So what is Creative Commons? It's a widely used form of open license run through a nonprofit, and it's basically providing a modular approach to copyright. So it's allowing the content creator to select use they choose to retain and what they choose to give away. And so there are various configurations that that can be established. Creative Commons licensed material is that you as the educator have a very clear sense of what you are able to do the work that you find with one of these licenses. So to kind of go through them quickly, and then we'll talk a little bit about the implications as far as fair use goes. Come back to you a little bit there. But all different sort of permutations of Commons license, CCO, which are items that are in the public domain. So items that can be freely used, remixed. The 5 Rs are totally available to you with a CC. Can you go back a second, Matt? Sorry, I'm coming to that. Thank you. Attribution with a CC. Since you can display, perform your copyrighted work and any derivatives that are based on your work, but only if those subsequent users give you full credit. Like as others to distribute derivative works only under a license identical to the license that governs your work. So this has some pretty important implications for adapting an open textbook, which we'll get to. This is another one that has some important implications for open textbooks. And if, in this case, if you assign an ND license, you are letting others copy, distribute, display, perform the work, only copies. You are not allowing folks to make derivative copies of your work. With the non-commercial license, you let other view, display, and perform your work and derivative works based upon it, but for non-commercial purposes only. So CC license, again, provide this alternative kind of model to copy and very explicit directions to any who are seeking to use the work afterwards about what they can't do. You know, Creative Commons and these kinds of licenses do not take away the fair use argument. You're still able to make fair use arguments. But this provides an incredibly clear roadmap as far as what you can and can't do. Some maybe one circumstance may look a little bit different in other circumstances. So trying to figure out exactly what a strong fair use argument is can it a little bit easier. Matt, did you want to add anything on the fair use piece before we move on to this?
No, I think that you've covered what we needed to say. We're good.
So I think of that. At the top in the sort of green bar here, you can see the licenses that are more CCO. As you move down, you start seeing in that yellow bar there, the CC BY no bars where you cannot be remixing and revising, or 2 of the 5 are CBY, non-commercial, non-derivative being the most restrictive before you get to full copyright rights reserved.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so we're things really, really well is get good content in front of eyeballs, right? So we have sophisticated marketing machines that make it easy to locate a text that might work for your class. It can be trickier to find open text. One way, there are a lot of really great networks that we can plug into to try to find good materials that can work for specific classes. I'm going to review 2 possible places to look for open textbooks today, but there's a lot more, and this is really to whet your appetite a little bit. All right, so let me see if I can take over the screen here. Okay, hi Matt.
Yep. There you go.
Thank you. Great, so here we are. This is the library's Open Educational Resources Guide, which does provide different kinds of current events, basics about OSIS writ large. And I'm going to be going right over here to the Open Textbook Resources tab, which has an access point to some of. And the first one we're going to talk about is the Open Textbook Library. So I'm just going to go ahead and go right to their page. So the library is a project of the Open Textbooks Network, which is run out of the Minnesota College Development. And this is a community of individuals and institutions where resources as a solution to some of these problems we've been talking about of access, cost, and quality with regard to commercial texts. So they provide training and support for the members of their institution to maintain the Open Textbook Library. So this is the Open Textbook Library page, and for an item to be contained in the Open Textbook, it has to be a complete textbook, so it's not going to include any other resources, which is really helpful when you're looking for kind of a full package. And it has to be used in multiple higher education institutions or affiliated with a higher education institution. So you know that you're resources here. These are drawn from all over, so you may find some of the textbooks here also located in some of these, some other. The library is currently working to become a member of the Open Textbook Network, so stay tuned as more resources may be coming. An opportunity to kind of take a look at what that collection looks like. So a general rule of thumb when searching for open educational resources is that the browse functions tend to be a little bit stronger than the direct. Looking to browse for some general education materials, I might go through browse subject. and search there just to see what kinds of courses used in general education courses on different campuses. So you kind of get a sense of what is here. And maybe I, in this list, it's my little touchpad here, and want to jump right in. And this is one that I spotted right away because I'm glancing at this, and as I'm to textbook, information literacy instruction, I might spot a name that I recognize, someone who I know is influential in the field, and say, okay, this looks great. Let me take a look at this. The kinds of resources or the kinds of information reasons textbook library is you're going to have to reviews that to let you kind of see immediately how the book is perceived by other members experts in the about the authors, as well as quick access to information about the license. And thinking about the license is something you have to keep in mind pretty textbooks. So you can see this is a attribution. So if I use this in commercial context, and if I use any derivative, if I create any derivative works, my derivative works will have to be my decision as to whether or not this book will meet my needs depending on what I'm thinking about doing with it. I've also got access to multiple if I wish to assign this book to my class. Now, as far as some of the trouble of searching for open textbooks, if I were actually to search for the author, I would probably not have too much luck, even though she does have a work here. So that's one drawback here. And another is, I'm just going to hit my back button here, from this book, Visual Literacy, and I was curious as to what other books might have a chapter on visual literacy. I could not easily. So one thing to know is you're probably going to need to do some browsing and looking through tables of contents to see at a more granular level or an information literacy text that I could have looked at here, but I'd have to open them up and kind of browse through out there. All right, so another example that I just want to do the LibGuide and clicking on OER Commons. All right, so OER Commons is a pretty vast repository of resources from the most granular level, and you can kind of see through this sidebar here what kinds of resources are included in this repository. So you might have specific case studies, simulations, lesson kinds of things. But the link that this has led us to is specifically to their textbook collection. So this repository was founded by the Institute for the Study of Knowledge, Management, and Education. Different levels. So that's important to know too, because if you're looking for college textbooks, you might want to start with the open textbook. One thing I do like about this repository, though, is that it gives you lots of different options for how you search and how you limit. So you could, for example, start out education text, limit to education. I've got 43 results that came back. Just going down again. Conditions of use. Now, what kind you want to be associated with your book. So I want no strings attached. I want the most open license that I can find. All kinds of different levels here. So I want to restrict again with education. I'm looking for graduate and professional uses. So now I have 5 books to choose from. So you can kind of see subject, but then limiting down based on the kinds of criteria that might matter when you are So these are different resources that you could leverage to search for open text. If you need help finding anything, if you're interested with in exploring an open textbook for a class, just ask. You know, we at the library would be happy to help. And there is, again, a lot of networks and a lot of communities out there that are working on open textbooks. Did you want to add anything there?
No, absolutely. I think that you've covered the some of the stuff that basically it's, you know, some of these repositories they're well designed and they allow you for all these filters, and others, like you demonstrated with the open network, the open textbook network, that the search feature are not there yet. But so that definitely makes, you know, makes it a little bit more challenging. But it's kind of, you have to spend the time to just browse and figure it out in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so the next slide was actually about the LibGuide, and you talked a little bit about it. We'll come back to that at the end. We'll give you the URL for that. So usually when in my role as an academic technology consultant, and when people ask me about open content, what I try to do is I use a worksheet. So I created a worksheet that's called the OER Treasure Hunt, and that's available at that URL. That's usually pretty helpful because it does help faculty member and professors actually narrow down on the keywords and the things that they want to search for and the gaps they're likely to be wanting to fill with the use of open educational resources. So I'm not going to dig into the OER Treasure Hunt, but it is available at the URL that is shared on the slides, and the slides themselves are also available to anyone who wants to use them. So now, go ahead, Meg.
All right. So before you throw your trusty, often used commercial textbook out the window, what should you be considering as the single most important aspect of choosing any textbook, of course, and maybe it goes almost without saying, should always be how well that text meets your course outcomes and your needs. Discussion doesn't take away that most basic kind of fact. So you want to go ahead and go ahead and advance the slide one more. Matt, go ahead, one more. Thank you. Matt is our slide disc job. So these are some sort of basics that you might think of with almost any text for your class. Is it appropriate to the student's needs in terms of their educational level, their cultural contexts, their ability to access the meaning of the content? Organized out, using consistent and appropriate terminology. In your expert opinion, is the content accurate? And is it navigate in the case of our print kind of resources, or in an online version, are there broken links and areas that just aren't really appropriate reading level? Does it include examples that are appropriate for your students? Particularly with regard to their cultural backgrounds, et cetera, I think is an important thing to be thinking. And then as books specifically, what kinds of additional criteria might you think about? Adapted to suit your needs according to the license. So again, going back to the which it's shared at. And is it modular? And I think the importance of modularity depends really on what you want to do with the text. A good textbook is going to chunk material into manageable sections. And similarly, a good textbook is going to follow sort of a hierarchical rule. Students are going to learn foundational knowledge first, build upon that. Subsequent opportunities come before, but you're going to want to make sure that you are that if you're looking to remix the text, modularity offered by it is sufficient to allow you to do that. involve web resources, video resources, it becomes more important than ever to really check whether or not it's accessible, particularly for students with disabilities. So does it have alt tags for screen readers? Is there closed captioning available for video content? And that sort of thing. Now, for some faculty, ancillary resources are very important as you consider whether or not to adopt an open textbook. And there often are not as many really sleek ancillary resources associated with open textbooks, and this is something that is an important consideration. Some open textbooks do have ancillary resources, but many do not, and so this may or may not be of concern to you. And one way that the open textbook community has worked around this is that there are oftentimes communities that form around the use of specific texts. So, for example, there is a pre-calculus textbook that has a very robust kind of website where people add in practice questions, lesson plans, lots of additional resources, and that builds up over time. So many of these texts will have communities around them that can help sort of fill that gap. Okay, Matt, there we go. So if you're interested in getting started with an open text, but you love your current textbook, you don't necessarily need to throw your textbook all away to get started with open educational resources. There are a range of ways to incorporate free learning materials into your course. So in the print world, I think the usual method of selecting a textbook might be to find the book that you think is a good match to fit your course goals and learning outcomes, but omit certain chapters, provide handouts to supplement the text, maybe a few smaller readings, and the same process can really apply to open textbooks. As you saw with the OER Commons, you can search by many different types of materials that could be supplementary to materials to a text that you may adopt. Cost, of course, and cost savings for our students is not the only driver behind open textbook development and adoption. Quality and accessibility are also a big part of this. So if there are other resources that are higher quality that you know of, like a really high quality simulation or tutorial, they may be available in the large open educational resources world. So that's something to consider as well, that you don't have to, it's not a one size fits all in the open textbook world, just as it's not in the commercial textbook world. Mm-hmm. All right, so when you do decide you want to, you found a text that you think can meet the needs of your class and you want to adapt that text, what should you keep in mind? There was a 2012 paper by Hilton, Wiley, and Lutz titled Examining the Reuse of Open Textbooks. And in that paper, the authors noted that only about 7.5% of instructors who adopt an open textbook also heavily modify that textbook. So oftentimes, adopting may mean just that, adopting it fully. However, remember that anything and everything in an open textbook can be changed as long as the conditions of that open license are met, as we've discussed. So why might you choose to roll up your sleeves and adapt an open textbook to meet your needs? And here are a couple examples, and we've touched on some of these already. You may want to update the content. You may notice that the content is 2 or 3 years old and there's been a really important development since. You may choose to translate a work into another language. Change the examples to make them more culturally relevant to your students. This is something that happened not long ago with an OpenStax textbook on sociology, one of the first open textbooks that OpenStax had put out. A group in Canada substantially changed that textbook in order to have more culturally relevant examples for a Canadian student audience instead of an American student audience. We bring in more feminist perspectives for sociology for that text throughout the book. And then, this is kind of an interesting little story because they shared this back with OpenStax and some of their changes made it into the second edition. So again, this is the power of that kind of community adaptations, building upon adaptations over time to make a better product. So there are many reasons that you might choose to adapt a text. So here are some steps to think about when you think about adapting a textbook. First of all, we've talked about checking that license and making sure that the license does not prohibit the creation of derivative works. So in this case, you want to avoid, if you something you want to modify, you want to avoid that CC non-derivative clause. You're going to want to check the format of the actual item. So, for example, if you know you want to modify something extensively, you may find that if the text is only available in a PDF form, it can be kind of hard to edit. There are different ways to get around this. You can contact the original author and see if there's another kind of file format that you can use to change it up. I know that in computer science and mathematics, GitHub can often be a really good source for finding other formats of some of these texts. So there are different kind of ways to get around that. But some of the formats that are listed here, EPUB format, HTML, Word, text, can be a little bit easier to modify. So look for those formats. You can choose an appropriate editing tool. This is important depending on what you need to do. So Pressbooks, Word, Google Docs, a little bit more flexible. And then think about how you want to license your derivative work. Remember that if it was licensed, again, as share alike, as we saw with the example in the Open Textbook Library, your work is going to need to be released with the same license as the original source material. So you'll need to take that into account as you think of what you want ultimately your final product to look like and who you want it to be able to be shared with. And finally, choose how you want it to be shared. So students, we know, prefer multiple formats. Some like to print their items. Some might have an e-reader and choose to read it on a tablet. So EPUBs are the most common format for reading ebooks on e-readers and tablets. They're very good with screen readers for accessibility purposes and things like that. So think about offering your final product in multiple formats and bring that into your thought process early on as you think about adapting.
Okay.
Matt, on to you.
Yes. And then the other part, once you've made your changes, is that you want to choose a place where you're going to share your open textbook that you've just made tweaks on. So of course you can be on the safe side and just say, you know what, I'm just going to share to my own students. I'm going to use my learning management system that's available at my institution and just share the file directly in that space. And then in cases like that, then it's only available to the students, to your students in your institution. But then you can also choose other options, like for instance, at the University of Delaware, we do have Google Sites and Google Drive that would allow you to create a larger audience for your open textbook. So you can just, if you create a Google site and just host the file there or host the content itself on a Google site, you can decide to restrict it, for instance, for the institution or make it completely open. Same thing if you put your file on Google Drive, you can decide to make the file completely open to the world if you wanted to, or you can restrict it to certain audiences. And then you could go with an option like WordPress, where you're basically creating a website to host your material and then ask people to actually engage with the content. You could also have kind of a blog there that's a tech watch or a watch about the industry, that where you're just also reflecting on what is happening in this specific discipline and engaging with your students so that they guest blog or they comment on things that you put up. And then the textbook becomes even more dynamic and more just up to date and really live with what's happening in the world. We've seen that already. Okay, now, so we're at the end of the hour, so we're going to make sure that we go through the last couple of slides and take questions if we can. So one of the things that, one of the takeaways that we wanted to bring up is the idea that openness is a way to showcase your teaching. So, I attended a session by Jesse Stomel a couple of months ago, and he was basically showing that teaching takes up between 10 and 90% of your time, depending what your status is in higher education. But then if research is the only output that actually allows you to show what you're doing and who you are as an academic, you're leaving 10 to 90% of what you do in the dark. So even if you share with your department chair or whatever, people can't know you're a good teacher if you don't make stuff open. Engaging with OER and open textbook is a way to actually showcase your teaching and your expertise. So establish an online presence, connect with other folks who teach the same discipline, establish a portfolio, a presence, so that if you ever need to showcase your teaching, you can actually even showcase to other schools and not necessarily for your current employer. As a career move, I think it's a good thing. Make open a part of your toolbox. So we saw that the student was a captive market at the beginning. I think that if you make open a part of your toolbox, then students also have access to more affordable materials. Sometimes you can decide to go with a textbook that's going to be cheaper because you know that a lot of materials is covered by open materials. So it allows you to gives you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to creating the entire course pack that goes with your course, basically. So make sure that you also include open and not only listen to the vendors. So Meg.
Okay, two really quick examples of some interesting open textbook initiatives happening right now. Scottsdale Community College is up here on the screen, and they are now offering a textbook-free degree program as part of its hybrid associate in arts degree. Scottsdale Community College has been involved in the creation of open educational resources for a number of years and is part of a larger county initiative, the Maricopa Millions OER project, which was launched in 2013 and aimed to reduce costs for students by $5 million in 5 years. And I believe if I'm right, I believe they have succeeded and even surpassed that goal at this point. So part of this was providing grants to focus on aligning and developing open educational resources with the course curriculum for the district's higher enrollment and developmental courses. So that led to a lot of foundational courses having open educational resources and open textbooks created and modified for the needs of those students in order to support a full program. And then another program to mention, and this just happened in October, the governor of Rhode Island announced a plan to replace traditional textbooks with free materials as a means of supporting Rhode Island's statewide goal of ensuring that 70% of Rhode Island residents have at least an associate's degree by the year 2025. This is spearheaded by the Rhode Island Office of Innovation, and 6 private universities in the state, private and public universities in the state have signed on at this point. Librarians are quite involved in this effort in Rhode Island, so those of us who may be watching this who are coming from that professional walk of life should probably stay tuned for what's happening in Rhode Island. It looks like it's a very interesting project, and will be more so. Stay tuned. I think that the librarians from Rhode Island will be having lots to say. And then finally, a very local example. Here at UD, an open textbook provided through OpenStax and co-authored by UD Professor of Chemistry and Biochemistry, Klaus Theopold, is now the central text for Chemistry 103. In fall 2016, it served about 210 UD students, we actually contacted OpenStax to find out what the use of that text that Dr. Theopold helped to author looks like worldwide, and we received back that over 62,000 students are using it worldwide. So a local effort here in partnership with OpenStax that has some pretty impressive ripple effects in the larger world.
And this slide is basically just a comparison of the cost that would be involved with different formats or different, if you compared with the commercial offering. So for instance, the chemistry OpenStax book is available online for download for free. So if people want an electronic version of it, the students can just download it for free, so it's $0. They can also order a print-on-demand version for $55. So we've made basically this table showing that for all the UD students, the 2010 students, this is how much they would all collectively spend in order to get those specific textbooks. You see a Pearson offering for something similar The hardcover version for the 13th edition is $232.79. There's actually a 14th edition that's coming in January. That's going to be even more expensive if you like to spend more money. And then there's the chemistry version of 12th edition of McGraw-Hill that is $257.66. So when you look at it in an aggregate, you see how much students are spending collectively on these textbooks. So we're talking a range from $0 to $16 million for the 62,000 students who actually adopted the Chemistry OpenStax textbook. If these guys had to actually buy the hardcover chemistry from McGraw-Hill, that's how much they would have spent. Of course, those spendings are not they're not accurate because students resell the books and they rent books and they use a paper version or whatever. So that's why I also provided the cheapest available option on Amazon to make a comparison. So between 16 million and 4 million if they wanted to use the chemistry McGraw-Hill edition. So just to it gives you an idea of scale of how much students would save collectively if we adopted open materials. There you go.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for us, right? Almost on the dot. It's an hour plus 1 minute. But there's a lot to talk about with open textbooks. I hope that Matt and my material today is helpful to you as you're thinking about your role with regard to open textbooks on your campus, or if you're joining us here at UD. We're looking forward to having many more conversations about open textbooks in the coming months, and stay tuned. So thank you all so.
So Meg, if you want to take a couple of questions, I know you have a couple of people with you.
Okay.
So do people in your audience actually have questions?
We'll see.
Is there any data on like how the textbooks, like in terms of how they perceive the credibility, that kind of thing?
Yeah, Matt, I don't know. Could you hear that okay? Lauren Wallace is here with us, and she was asking if there's any research or information about how students perceive open textbooks in terms of credibility, et cetera.
I know there's been studies around that. I don't have a specific example of that, but I'm pretty sure that there has been research around that. The perception of, to me, the perception of quality is is something that the expert has to do. So if the instructor judges that a specific open textbook is of quality to use in their courses, then that adds to the trust that goes with that specific open textbook. And that's why the initiatives by the Open Textbook Network are really important, because then it shows that there are a number of institutions who have adopted specific textbooks, and shows that people in that industry have made that choice to, and then, you know, if you read it in detail and there's stuff you don't like about an open textbook, then you tweak it, make changes, and you drop chapters that you don't like, you add other stuff from your own, you create your own collection that you feel is good enough for your students.
I can say that I did read some research as far as what elements of a textbook students actually find most useful for themselves. And it was kind of surprising what I was reading as far as, like, we want bold text, easy to find chunked information, you know, some of the most basic things. And I think one thing that some OER anyway, and Matt, feel free to chime in with your own experience, but sometimes gets this bad rap for being a little less suave and sleek than the commercial publishers. But if you actually look at the research, the elements that the students themselves report to be most important for their learning oftentimes are kind of things we take for granted, and very, very fundamental, simple kinds of things.
I think that one of the other things you need to consider is that textbooks are designed to be, they're designed to be written for an audience, and in a context of, let's make it really easy for these people to get something very sequential and whatever. The reality is that when they're not in school anymore, they're going to find messy information. And I think that the idea of using openly available content, not necessarily open textbooks, but openly available content that is not necessarily as pre-digested for them, is also a good thing, because they're going to have to deal with the real world one day or another, and you won't be there to actually guide. I use the metaphor of the training wheels. The textbook to me is a bicycle with training wheels, and the training wheels are useful at the beginning, but eventually you have to drop the training wheels if you want to be more agile and faster. So I think that it's the same thing with materials that are designed in a textbook format. In my opinion, eventually should be replaced with materials that are from primary sources, from sources that they find on the internet, from data, and then students should be able to take that information and make sense of it.
Any other questions from you guys? Okay, no more questions here, Matt.
Okay, so we'll stop the broadcast. Thanks, Meg. Thanks, people. And This is recorded. We got the slides there. I'm going to make the video. The link to the video actually available from the slide. So just take this URL, www.udel.edu/003428, and then all the archive of this session will be available at that URL. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Matt.
We'll continue this discussion online and everywhere. Okay, bye.